Thanks for staying with us on The Full View. Now, a report has been released looking into the prevalence of targeted killings in Eastern and Southern Africa. Kim Thomas from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime joins me for more. Very good evening. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Just please define targeted killings for us and why you decided to look at Mozambique, South Africa and Kenya for this report.
Oh, good evening and thank you for having me. So first on the definition of targeted killings, these are killings for what we've called political, economic or personal gain, and it's where a specific person has been targeted to for elimination, so to say, for someone else to have some form of gain. Usually these take place with a hitman, but sometimes the arrangement is maybe a little less formal. For example, in a gang or something like that, it'll be a gang member, and so not necessarily an outsourced hitman, but someone working for them. So that's how we would have defined it. South Africa was chosen for the study because we've got a long-standing research on this topic in the country, and so it was building on that database. And of course, because of the extent of assassinations or targeted killings in South Africa. And then we also looked specifically into Kenya and Mozambique, partly because our research teams have already been working in those countries and we understood both the sort of criminal and political context in which we were working in, but also because we thought that they would be good countries to study considering their political histories and the different sort of political economies of each country.
All right, so what did you find about the prevalence of targeted killings in East and Southern Africa?
So it was quite different across the different countries. Speaking into South Africa first, this was our biggest database, largely because the South African media covers cases a lot more and is quite a free and fair media. And so if a hit happened, even in a more local or rural area, it could be covered by the news. And so there's also the fact that South Africa has got just generally more violence and more targeted violence. And so the South African database was quite a bit bigger. For the period of 2000 to 2020, we recorded 1,822 cases in South Africa. So that really is a lot of cases. And I think more worrying than that is the fact that in the last 6 years, we recorded 858 cases. So of a 21-year data period, almost half of the cases happened in the last 6 years. So that tells us that not only has South Africa been having a problem of assassinations for quite some time, but that it has gotten worse in more recent years. I must note, barring 2020, in which we saw a decline, but that was likely due to the restriction on freedom of movement as a result of the lockdowns. Preliminary data for 2021 shows that it is again increasing. For Kenya, we saw less cases, but interestingly similar style cases. So we also had political cases, organized crime-related cases, and then cases related to what we've termed as personal hits. So those are also the categories in South Africa, although South Africa also has a category solely for the taxi industry because we have so many assassinations in the taxi industry in South Africa. And then Mozambique had the smallest data set, and that's largely because their media is less open, less sort of free and fair, and so less cases would be reported, particularly the more political style cases. And so we also had to rely on a team of field researchers to sort of investigate and find out exactly how many cases are happening in Mozambique. And like South Africa, they were also largely politically and organized crime-related hits.
Kim, what role does economics play in the killings across the three countries, and what is a criminal economy?
So I think that it's quite difficult to say each country is a little different. Within Kenya, I would say that for an example, we had a lot of cases in Kenya that related specifically to land disputes. So those were essentially directors of companies that had shares in a big sort of rural land, and they essentially wanted to sort of take out each other to get full ownership of the land before it was claimed by its sort of original owners. And so there you can see that the motivation for the hits is economic, right? I think generally your motivation across all the categories is going to be largely economic. Even your political ones, generally you're taking out your competition so that you can have more power, so you have more access for sort of corrupt motives, so to say. So I think there really is, across the board, a largely economic motive. And then in South Africa, we see it quite clearly in a few industries. And as I mentioned, the taxi industry, we see that they happen both within taxi associations, but also across taxi associations. So within a taxi association, you're going to have hits relating to power struggles to get sort of higher up in the association so that you can have more decision-making power and access to the resources of the taxi association. But then you also have them between taxi associations over route disputes. And so you can really see the motives are quite sort of diverse in that. I think also worrying about the taxi industry in South Africa, and important to note, is that is also where hitmen are getting recruited from. So the industry itself is quite prone to violence and has a history of violence. And so you have people working as sort of a security role within the industry. And they are often just keeping the taxi bosses safe or members of the association safe. But then they also often are doubling as hitmen for the association or hitmen for specific taxi bosses or taxi owners. But then if someone wanting to do a hit for a personal, political, or other motive, they often recruit from the taxi industry itself.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Kim Thomas from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, joining me there on that report.